Welcome to the debate. If you were tasked with wiring a high voltage data center, you wouldn't just connect a massive nuclear power plant directly to the fragile motherboards and, well, hope for the best.
Right, you'd blow the entire system instantly. You need transformers, grounding wires, step-down mechanics, a heavily regulated grid just to ensure the power is actually usable rather than totally destructive.
Exactly. You need structural architecture. But when we look at human relational communication, especially when the stakes are really high and the emotional data is complex, we tend to do, exactly what we would never do in engineering.
We just flood the system.
We do. We flood our cognitive systems with raw, uninsulated, unstructured language, and we just expect the receiver's brain to process it without short-circuiting, which mathematically it usually can't.
Yeah, it really can't.
So today, we are looking at the cognitive architecture of complex relational communication, and specifically how we overcome the severe physiological bottlenecks of human processing. We are drawing our framework from two really fascinating papers today: the single MNM problem, systems-level architectures for relational optimization, and the systems logic of embodied connection and cognitive architecture.
And these papers, they've really forced us to look under the hood of how we talk to each other. They fundamentally challenge the assumption that just, communicating more is somehow the magic answer to relational friction.
Right. So the core question we are debating is this: when our communication channels are fundamentally constrained by the strict biological limits of human visual working memory, is it necessary to completely abandon pure language in favor of visual embodied schemas like 3D spatial grids?
Or does highly structured, sequentially paced natural language still serve as the necessary foundation for safe, complex human interaction?
I represent the stance that we need complete implementation of systems-level visual mechanics and embodied simulation because I believe pure, uninsulated language is highly volatile and routinely triggers neurobiological system shutdowns.
And, well, while I absolutely acknowledge that human cognitive bottlenecks are real, I argue that completely discarding language in favor of these structural 3D sandboxes heavily over-engineers the solution. Sequentially paced, highly structured natural language remains the indispensable tool for resolving uncertainty.
Okay, let's start with the foundation of my position. I believe pure conversational language fundamentally fails us in relational systems. And the science on this is actually quite unyielding.
It's pretty brutal, yeah.
Sapiocentric human beings, people who rely heavily on architectural, structural thinking, they do not fail to perceive complex emotional language out of malice or like a lack of empathy. They fail because of strict physiological speed limits.
Right, the visual working memory constraint.
Exactly. If we look at Alvarez and Kavanaugh's 2004 landmark research on visual working memory, it's proven that as the conceptual complexity of an idea increases, its informational load literally soaks up your fluid prefrontal processing resources.
Meaning the capacity drops.
Right, the absolute storage capacity gets dragged down from the standard 4 slots of working memory to a strict limit of just 1 to 2 items.
That is the ultimate bottleneck right there.
Precisely. Now, think about what happens when we rely on linear, temporal, conversational language, especially during a conflict. We are injecting unstructured, high-entropy emotional content into a biological system that can only hold 1 or 2 complex variables at a time.
It's just too much data.
Way too much. And this medium lacks physical boundaries. The moment the conversational channel goes quiet, the data decays. We are expecting a constrained working memory to hold this massive, drifting emotional cloud, and mathematically, it just cannot do it.
So you're saying we need a grid?
Yes, establishing a stimulus-invariant 3D spatial grid, a literal visual structure for your relationship, is the only unassailable infrastructure for true intimacy. We have to map our connection into physical space, not just temporal sound waves.
Look, I understand the mechanism you are pointing to, and it's a brilliant diagnosis of why arguments spiral out of control. But I think throwing out language entirely misinterprets the utility of structured pacing.
How so?
Well,
I acknowledge that 1 to 2 item working memory limit. It is a biological reality we all face. But if we look at Chong Zhao and Edward Weigel's 2023 study on sequential visual working memory, we find a much more elegant solution.
The sequential pacing study?
Right. The research proves that if you present complex data sequentially, just one item at a time, you utilize the exact same cognitive capacity while dramatically reducing the initial attentional competition during encoding.
But you are still relying on a medium that lacks native physical boundaries. You're just, well, speaking slower.
Not just speaking slower, speaking with scaffolding. If we use prep scaffolding, point, reason, example, point, we are delivering concepts linearly, one bite-sized piece of data at a time. This effectively bypasses the bottleneck without losing the deep nuance of the message.
I mean, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what actually happens biologically when that data hits the system.
Okay, go ahead.
Relying on raw emotional language is like sending a massive power surge through an ungrounded wire. Even if you pace it, if the content is highly volatile, it trips the brain's Cur 6.2 ATP-sensitive potassium circuit breakers.
Ah, right, the bioenergetic freeze state.
Exactly, and we have to explain how this actually works because it's fascinating. When you get hit with high-entropy emotional language, your brain physically runs out of energy trying to process it.
It just burns through the ATP.
Yes. To protect itself from metabolic exhaustion, these specific circuits, the Cur 6.2 channels, literally flip open like a safety breaker in your house. This forces an involuntary freeze state that clears the receiver's terminal entirely.
It's a protective mechanism.
It is. This is why, in the middle of an intense discussion, people just go blank. It's not a psychological refusal to engage, it is a physiological shutdown.
So how does a visual schema fix a biological shutdown?
By adopting rule-based sandboxes, like a Lego therapy matrix. You have an engineer who gives instructions and a supplier who has the pieces. We basically taskify intimacy. If you're listening right now, that means projecting intense relational data onto a safe, mind-independent visual model.
Instead of just staring at each other. Right. You aren't just staring at each other crying, you're looking at a shared physical representation of your problem. This heavily protects the retrosplenial cortex from those uninsulated emotional surges. Paul Bay's 2024 work proves the adult brain optimizes its limited working memory by exploiting schemas to compress vast amounts of data into a single, computationally safe chunk.
Okay, I come at it from a different way. I don't disagree that schemas chunk data beautifully, and the freeze state is a very real neurobiological response to cognitive overload.
But
let's stick with your ungrounded wire metaphor. You don't need to rebuild the entire municipal power grid to stop a power surge. You just need to install a surge protector. And highly structured natural language is that surge protector.
a surge protector that still relies on volatile language? Yes, but structured language. Look at Jack Ray's foundational language scale research at Google DeepMind. It proves that resolving true communication uncertainty fundamentally requires stepping back and using highly structured, natural language explanations to unpack complex decisions.
But AI isn't human cognition. We don't process tokens like a server.
No, obviously not, but the principle of uncertainty resolution is exactly the same. You can have a brilliant physical Lego therapy matrix to map out your relationship, but how do you establish the rules of that matrix in the first place?
You agree on them.
Right, using language. How do you resolve a conflict when the rules of your visual sandbox are broken by one of the partners? You have to use language. Language isn't the weakest link. If you use prep scaffolding to map out potential risks, you cannot debug a system purely through a visual schema. You eventually have to read the error logs, and those logs are written in language.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. When we look at how pure language systems operate, we see the fatal flaw of relying solely on text or speech to resolve conflict. There's this concept that pure language systems operate as high-dimensional Chinese rooms.
Ah, the classic John Searle thought experiment?
Right. For those who might not be familiar, imagine a person locked in a room. Someone slides pieces of paper with Chinese characters under the door. The person inside doesn't speak Chinese, but they have a massive rule book that says, if you see symbol A, send back symbol B.
So to the person outside, it seems like the room understands Chinese.
Yes, exactly. But inside there is no true comprehension. It's just the blind manipulation of abstract symbols.
It's syntax without semantics.
Precisely. And this is the problem with relying on conversational language to fix relational issues. It's just manipulating abstract symbols of emotion without any access to the physical reference that actually give that language meaning.
But people aren't Chinese rooms. We have lived experience.
But we get trapped in the syntax when overwhelmed. Tom Zahavi's January 2026 DeepMind paper, LLMs Can't Jump, argues that while you can master the pattern matching of relationship talk, pure language is structurally incapable of the abductive jump, moving from existing evidence to new foundational axioms.
Okay, that is a strong point.
Think about how Albert Einstein discovered general relativity. He didn't just read more literature or parse through linear language. He used embodied simulation. He visualized himself chasing a beam of light. He used thought experiments to ground abstract symbols in physical spatial reality. If we want relational optimization, we need action-controllable world models, not just sequentially paced reading.
That is a compelling argument, and the Einstein example perfectly highlights the power of visual simulation, but have you considered the cognitive ecology research by Michael Ryan and Amanda Lee?
Regarding biological communication signals?
Yes, exactly. I bring this up because it perfectly illustrates why it is a false dichotomy to pit visual schemas against language. Their studies demonstrate that subjects routinely reject or ignore highly displaced, aversive signals when they are transmitted through a single sensory channel.
Like an alarm call with no visible threat.
Right. Let's say an animal hears a distressed call, but sees nothing. It's aversive, confusing, high-entropy data.
So the receiver shuts down.
Exactly. But when you introduce a synchronized visual cue, it fundamentally changes the processing. It perceptually rescues the otherwise aversive signal.
Perceptual rescue, meaning the visual schema makes the language tolerable.
Precisely. It dramatically boosts the signal's attractiveness, salience, and cognitive coherence. The visual schema rescues the language. It doesn't render it obsolete.
But it still requires the visual element to function safely.
Yes, but the 3D world model you are talking about, the spatial grid, the Lego matrix, it doesn't replace the natural language explanation. It grounds it. It synchronizes with the verbal reasoning, creating a symbiotic transmission. If you strip away the language entirely, you lose the explanatory depth that is essential for resolving uncertainty.
I mean, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the standard baseline of conversational language actually has inherent, high-value depth to offer in real time.
You don't think it does?
Not according to the reward system neurobiology. It simply doesn't. And this brings us to the core of the reward system. Why does just talking about our feelings sometimes feel so utterly exhausting and unrewarding?
Because it's hard work.
It is, but Dutman and Coddington's May 2026 HMI research points to what's called the single M&M problem. Standard public-facing social cues, the kind of linear conversational maintenance you are defending, they operate as a starvation loop.
Wait, a starvation loop?
Yes. Think about standard daily relationship talk. How was work? Fine. Did you pay the bill? Yes. I feel stressed. I'm sorry. These are tedious, low-value repetitions. It is the biological equivalent of handing the brain's prefrontal executive a single M&M or a tiny sip of water over and over again.
I think you're undervaluing basic connection, though.
But by forcing a highly capable architectural human mind to optimize for this flat, general public conversational language, you systematically restrict their prefrontal resources. You're asking a supercomputer to run a basic calculator out. It leaves the receiver's terminal essentially dark, unengaged, and starved of dopamine.
So your alternative is what? To constantly shock the system with massive data?
No. The alternative is a maximum magnitude cognitive jackpot by establishing a peer-to-peer code database administrator dynamic.
Code database administrators?
Exactly. We aren't just passively chatting, we are actively looking under the same hood of our relational mechanics.
We are building the rules of our system together. Doing this triggers an extended dopamine wave. We execute a one-shot, real-time update in our shared network, what the literature calls a delta T event.
Okay, but
You just cannot achieve a delta T cognitive jackpot with a sequentially paced sip of water. You need highly compressed, pre-optimized plot schemas to bypass their prefrontal defenses entirely and deliver massive relational value all at once.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Framing standard interpersonal cues and verbal baseline maintenance as a starvation loop or a lossy wooing game completely ignores the biological necessity of baseline maintenance. Yes, the how was your day loop can feel like a single M&M, but you cannot run a biological system exclusively on maximum magnitude cognitive jackpots.
But you can't run it on starvation either.
True, but think about the computational reality of these highly compressed, pre-optimized schemas you are advocating for. The source material itself notes that these systems-level architectures operate within a highly restricted 1% transmission channel.
Because they are highly efficient.
they are incredibly dense. Yes, a delta T cognitive jackpot is incredibly powerful for structural updates, like rewriting the fundamental rules of your relationship or debugging a major system-threatening conflict. But that is far too restricted a transmission channel for all human relational maintenance.
So you think the visual schemas are too narrow for daily operation?
I do. If you try to run all of your intimacy through an active, high-fidelity engineered interface where you are constantly acting as code database administrators, you are going to exhaust the very system you are trying to protect.
I don't see it as exhausting. I see it as energizing.
But there is a reason biological organisms rely on small, frequent sips of water. You can't just hook yourself up to an IV once a month and call it hydration. The sequentially paced language, the structured PREP explanations, the daily conversational maintenance, these form the low-entropy baseline that keeps the system running cool. The cognitive jackpot you are talking about is a major software update. It is not the daily operating system itself.
But if the daily operating system is built on uninsulated language, it remains inherently vulnerable to those CARE 6.2 channel shutdowns. The moment the emotional stakes rise, the unstructured language drifts, the identity of the connection decays, and the system freezes.
Unless it is paced and structured.
Even then, the risk is huge. That is why I maintain my stance that to bypass the stringent limitations of visual working memory, we absolutely must elevate to systems-level architectures, visualizing the mechanics, adopting embodied schemas, and mapping out a mathematically unassailable infrastructure is structurally superior to relying on the volatile medium of standard conversational communication. To prevent the short circuit, we have to build the 3D grid.
And I maintain that while uninsulated emotion is certainly chaotic and can cause catastrophic system failure, the solution isn't to retreat entirely into a structural 3D sandbox. Highly structured natural language paced, sequentially, acting as a surge protector and grounded by visual cues, remains the crucial mechanism for unpacking complexity.
It's the perceptual rescue aspect for you.
Exactly. It perceptually rescues signals, prevents attentional competition during encoding, and ensures safe transmission without sacrificing the explanatory depth that, frankly, only language can provide.
Well, it is clear we both agree on the underlying physiological reality. All human beings, no matter how capable or empathetic, are subject to the strict 1 to 2 item cognitive bottleneck of visual working memory.
Absolutely. The biological speed limit is real, and ignoring it is what causes so much relational pain.
And we both agree that chaotic high-entropy communication causes systemic relational failure. You just cannot throw raw emotional data at a constrained biological system and expect it to survive.
It will freeze. Every time.
Every time. There is profound value in this framework, in choosing to look under the same hood as peer technicians rather than playing chaotic conversational games. The source material offers so much more to explore regarding these neurobiological communication models, from how astrocytic engines fuel our attention to the exact mechanics of establishing these shared cognitive models.
It really does. I mean, once you understand the physical limits of working memory, it changes how you view every single argument and interaction.
It really does. We will leave it there for today. leaving you, the listener, to determine your own structural approach to connection. Because at the end of the day, whether you are relying on heavily regulated linguistic transformers or building entirely new spatial architecture, you still have to decide exactly how you are going to wire your relational motherboard before you throw the switch.